Right.
Yeah, it's not allowing me to put it on public yet. It's okay because it's streaming on YouTube
Uh-huh.
and it's streaming on Facebook, but it's only streaming to my friends. So if anybody's wanting to watch, they may want to tap in on YouTube because it's streaming on Kolagraphy TV.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a
Mm.
way to, if you have some people that want to tap in, you could even put that on your page if you. I don't know if you can, but um, let me see here. We'll give them a moment.
Okay, something I'm gonna have to work on is developing my savviness, which is gonna probably be one of the main things that takes on some of my focus in dealing in these social media streets.
That's very important, and I'm learning some. I need to learn some more things myself. It's very important because even the printing process, because you could get so much done, for yourself when you understand even just how to use these certain technologies. It's sometimes the thing that's holding us back.
Definitely.
Our friend says AI means ancestral interruption, and I'm not going to speak the
Ancestral.
name on live, but it's it's I like that because a lot of things that blocked us that we can't afford as black people and just maybe don't have the information for it. Even though people think AI is all bad, it has it's the duality in it or the polarity where if you use it correctly, it could be something that actually brings us forward, in ways that we could never do. Like I've gotten things done that I couldn't get done in 5 years. I got it done in like 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
Just it's insane. But anyway, that's what it is. We're in the year of the horse, so things will take off fast. So
Right.
again, if anybody that want to tap into Metaphysical Monday on and tap into the comments, I won't be able to see the ones on Facebook until after the live. So you can come down to Kolagraphy TV. The name is there across the screen, and I want to welcome you guys to Metaphysical Monday. What's good? What's good, Facebook? What's good, YouTube? We have here a special guest. Been waiting on this show for a while, Mr.
Mm-hmm.
Babalawo Kephra Ptah. I'm gonna let him introduce himself before I do my opening.
All right. Well, shoot, you did such a good job, you know. Baba Kephra Ptah, aka Ifalowo Fayemi, representing the Fayemi lineage, and at the same time showing and proving that each and every one of us can experience the greatness of the divine. So
Absolutely. Ashe.
uh, you
Ashe.
mentioned earlier, about technology, and I'm saying, hey, technology that belongs to Ogun. So I mean, it can,
Absolutely.
we understand that connection with technology is not a good or a bad thing. It's a tool.
Absolutely. I gotta go ahead since you said that. I have to honor Ogun because we're dealing with the forest vibration tonight. And that is definitely one of my Orishas. So we want to go ahead. I'm gonna add Ogun tonight with my malas.
There we go. There we
Yeah,
go.
yeah. Put that
Ogunye.
forest energy in there. Yeah,
There
they
we
they
go.
over here charging up though. So anyway, yeah. So we got a good show tonight, you guys. An interesting show. I want to go ahead and get started. And I want to thank Kephra. You guys can thank Brother Babalawo Kephra for bringing me out of my hibernation retreat period. Okay,
Oh
so
man, it was
let's go
bound
ahead
to
and
happen.
see if we can. We're definitely having some Mercury retrograde stuff going, but that's okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm having a glitch. I was trying to play as a little music, you guys, but that's okay. We're gonna go ahead and get started with the opening. So it's been about a year or so since I've really been live regularly. And I just want to just say peace and welcome back to those who will be joining us. Peace and welcome back to Brother Keffer because he's been here many times and he is one of backed by popular demand.
I
so
appreciate it.
yeah, so we're going to be talking about Sasquatch, also known as Bigfoot. This is a figure who has lived in North American forests long before modern media ever got involved. I spent time in the bear country this summer. Bass Lake, Yosemite, the Redwoods, and these are places that, which is bear country, and the bears also share the forest with Sasquatch and many other creatures, but Sasquatch in general. I don't know much about it, but I did get this really cool T-shirt that I wanted to show from
I
Bass
love it.
Lake with the Sasquatch,
I
and then it
love
got
it.
the Bigfoot around it. So we were in the
Uh-huh.
redwoods. Have you had a chance to? Are there redwoods in Seattle?
Not the way they are in California. Those trees down there, they look like you're on another planet in
I
that
mean,
forest. But
okay,
it
so
is,
let's.
you know,
Wow. So
so
you've been there before to Cali in the redwoods?
I went to Cali, but I never been in the redwoods, but I seen pictures of people next to those trees.
Hmm.
Okay. And I'm
Well,
like, oh, well,
yeah, I wanted to say this about the redwoods before we get started, and I'll let you take the floor. Just being in the redwoods in general is very breathtaking. You know, I've been several times, and we're gonna go again in July. And like you said, they're massive. You know, we get to
hmm
talking about even the size of a Sasquatch. These trees are massive, so it's like, almost they're so massive that you feel so small in the scheme of things, that I remember the first time I went, I just began to praise God because of the majesty of the trees, just how beautiful the forest was, just how you're so small in the scheme of things. All of the stress that I felt left because there's so much oxygen there, and it's just, yeah, it's deep. It's really deep. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to you. Or you want to add anything about the forest? The forest energy is great.
yeah.
Oh,
Well,
hold on, boom.
I'm in an evergreen state. So, I mean, there's wooded areas all around. There's like water everywhere. I'm in Seattle, so, but Washington is the evergreen state. So there's
Yes.
nothing but forests surrounding the cities. So if you go out and venture, you're going to run into some trees, and you're going to run into that energy associated with the trees. So a lot of times, I tell people, hey, if you want to make a connection and build your energy, heal yourself, increase your life force, go out amongst the trees where you get those negative ions. In Japan, they call it forest bathing. When you go out among the trees and you just chill with the trees and you let that energy cleanse you, you see?
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that's
Hmm.
an alchemical thing to go out amongst the trees and let the trees clean your aura and clean your auric field. So by all
Absolutely.
means,
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely, man. That's beautiful. Beautiful.
hmm
I mean, like I said, I can't. I think everybody, anybody and everybody that should get out to those redwoods at least one time in your life. It's definitely something to see, something to experience. So, and also, the trees are so massive. Let's get into this Sasquatch conversation. Speaking of the massive trees and the tribes even that inhabited the forest. And so, tell me, what inspired you to, or what brought out this interest in the Sasquatch as of late?
Well, I've been having a lot of interesting experiences. Okay, I'm gonna kind of take it back maybe into my childhood,
Mm-hmm.
but what I discovered recently is that it's kind of like a undercurrent in Pacific Northwest culture about the Sasquatch. You go down to the waterfront, you run into all kind of stores with trees, what should I say, statues of the Sasquatch. People wearing T-shirts similar to yours. You find it on coffee mugs and everything else. And maybe how many years ago with Harry and the Hendersons, that movie was based
That
in
was in the
Seattle.
80s, like
Yeah, in the
86 or
80s.
87 or something,
Yeah,
long time ago. I was a
long
child.
time ago.
Yeah.
So they was acknowledging that is because if you remember, it took place in Seattle, Washington. So we're not too far away from a place called Saskatchewan between here and Washington and Canada, you see. So that's the land of the Sasquatch right there. So we're bordering the land of the Sasquatch. But I grew up in Seattle, and this is, like I say, it's a really forested area, kind of. It's a nice city, but the city is not growing out. It's more or less growing up. It's more like what they call upzoning, you see. So you can see that there's been an attempt to preserve the wildlife, and national forests and national parks and stuff like that. You find a lot of those in this region. Anyway, being raised in the Pacific Northwest, I was living in kind of a tapestry of all kind of different stories. My father used to tell me a lot of things. His grandmother, my great grandmother, used to teach him a lot of things. She used to be on the reservations a lot. she used to talk a lot about the star people and UFOs. So she was into a lot of the metaphysics, and I kind of like inherited that because she would teach my dad. My dad would tell me all kinds of crazy things in which people thought my dad was a nut. And I'm like, hey, Dad, I think you're cool. I'll listen to you. And it turns out that he was on point the whole time. So anyway, none carried more weight for me in this recent period than the Sasquatch. And I'm going to tell you why. Now, you see hear these tales that circulated throughout certain circles in Seattle. Sometimes you even hear it at school, and maybe a few friends will talk about it. It wasn't something that Black people really talked about as much, but I would hear a lot from white folks and Native Americans. Now white folks being skeptical, but the Native American, populace, well, some of them, they would speak about it like it was an actual thing. In fact, they'll go as far as saying, well, maybe it's because you were not meant to ever see the Sasquatch, because it's not for you, right? Sometimes they'll rebut that way. But these elders, they spoke of this being with a mix of respect and caution, and not so much that it was a monster, but more or less this being has a presence. And they believe that this particular being is older, than all the cities that was built by man, older than the logging roads, older than the maps. So growing up so close to this area in the Cascades, it meant that the mountains were never just scenery. They were thresholds. Okay. So I absorbed a lot of local lore. I listened to people, hikers. I listened to everybody. I'd be involved in all kind of stuff. And there's times when I felt like I was being watched when I go out into the wooded areas. Okay. Now, sometimes I listen to what campers would say near Snoqualmie who heard about, loud noises and people reporting running across this hairy creature in these areas. There's teachings from a group that lived in Colville, and then there's the coast that got the Salish nations. These were another group of natives. They framed the Sasquatch not as so much as an imaginary animal or creature, but basically as people living in the deep woods and guardians and boundary keepers. So these teachings kind of shaped my perception about the lore in Washington State, right? It talked about how they inhabited the area and how they kind of like worked as guardians of the mysteries of the woods and the forest. So I learned at a very early age that the Sasquatch wasn't just a campfire tale, but it was part of, well, the identity.
Mm-hmm.
So you have like local radio hosts. Sometimes they debate about sightings about the creature. Sometimes people will say that they caught the creature. Debate. There's a picture somewhere you'll find where it looks like a very, very real being. They've debated on whether or not it's an actual being or an entity or a person in a suit and so on. But artists have carved stylized faces and, you know, um, powerful shoulders on this being as if they know that this entity exists. Okay.
Right.
And you see that
Mm-hmm.
there's stories of this going all the way up and down from Washington, all the way through Oregon, down into California. And these are different groups and nations. So they can't just be making this stuff up,
Right.
So you hear about people laughing about it, but, underneath it all, there was like this sense of truth. And the people in the
Mm-hmm.
Northwest, they don't just laugh. They don't laugh at the Sasquatch. They kind of laugh around him, you see. So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of the way, something you do when it's like too real to dismiss, but too mysterious to claim. So, as I got a little older, I realized that these stories were more than folklore. They were teachings about respect, okay, humility, and the limits of human knowledge. The forests around Seattle became classrooms, and the Sasquatch became a symbol of the wilderness and all that would refuse to be fully known. So there are people who are
Right.
divine about whether or not the Sasquatch exists. They're getting mixed messages. Some are getting
Mm-hmm.
messages that suggest there is something out there. Some say, well, no, I don't see it showing up. But again, you're dealing with something that's very ancient and tapped into the earth, you
Right.
see.
So,
So
when I want to ask you a couple of questions. So, have you ever been camping? Because, like in our area of the redwoods, like I didn't camp as a child, but I went on my first camping trip in my 20s, and
mm-hmm.
I did the real raw camping, and I've done the glam camping too.
Uh-huh.
Glamping, where you have like,
Glamping.
Airbnb or condo, but I've done the tent on the ground camping as well, out in the redwoods. Um, I was just wondering if you ever had a chance to even just go on a hike or anything, like to be in that frequency at all.
Yes, definitely. There's been a few times when I'd hike around Mount Rainier. You know, I've been camping maybe a couple times, maybe about maybe 2 or 3 times out there, and I've been hiking out there numerous times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the first time I experienced something that looked like it could have been an hominid-like being was when I was with some friends, but this is actually in Seattle in a place called Kubota Gardens. This is
Mm-hmm.
at night, and I swear I was with some friends, and somebody saw something running towards us, and he said, "Look out!" And we saw these two beings run right past us, and we didn't really get a good look at them because they ran so fast. But what I got out of what I could see was like two people that looked like they were very hairy, and they
Mm-hmm.
disappeared. They were very fast, like zoom. I'm like, what the hell was that? You know what I mean? Now this
So
is
were
in
they
Kubota
big?
Garden.
What were
They were
they,
like
large in
average.
size?
They
Hmm.
were like average size though. You know what I mean? They were like human size, but they were shaggy. They were hairy. You know, so they got so far I couldn't see or make out what I saw. It's almost like they were spirits that ran past us. Now
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk a little bit about that because this goes into something else. You see,
Mm-hmm.
these areas are known to be portals, you know, have special ley lines in those areas and places where people go and do a lot of mystical work. In fact, the Rocky Mountains had a mystery school, literally called the Rocky Mountain Mystery School. That's no longer in existence. But it was to the point that people could get initiated into the school. But in order for you to go to the highest level, you have to be full blood native. You have to be full blood Indian, right? So if you weren't, then they'll let you like go so far in it. Anyway, you know, I believe they closed it down to the public, to my understanding. So that knowledge is still out there, but there's something that I experienced out there at the base of Rock Mountain Rainier. Now, I was with a friend. We went camping. I got my ass handed to me by them mosquitoes. I'm like, I'm like feeling like I'm getting jumped. You know what I'm saying? I'm punching them, socking them, kicking them. They
You
get
didn't
the
bring
better
no
of me.
off.
Man, well, shoot. You know, at that time, I wasn't prepared. You know, I didn't know about bananas or none of that stuff. All I knew is that after they got done with me, I looked like I had barnacles all up and down my shoulders. That's how bad they got to me. But I had a very interesting experience. I discovered that being in the wilderness, you know, is a very mystical thing to do. And you will experience a lot of spiritual things there. And one of my first, most powerful experiences I ever had was I had a dream, right? And I'm up in a tent, you know, trying to like get comfortable. I'm having this dream that I'm surrounded by these three giants. They were giants wearing, they were dressed like firemen, right? So on the way leaving that area, because I went with a person who taught me, he was teaching me Qigong. So he was my Qigong teacher. So we went camping. I had my own tent and everything else in which I could stay in and just sit still, meditate. It would rain, it would come down, and I would basically just get a feel on the environment. So anyway, remember, I had this dream about these giants. They were dressed like firemen. They were in full regalia and they were kind of scary looking. It's like I ain't never seen nothing like that. And this is before I had E5 or anything like that, okay? And but it caught something in me. Now I did a lot of mystical work on my own, so I got their attention. When we left the camp, I saw a placard, and the placard showed 3 firemen had died in the fire, in a forest fire there. That's where their spirits were communicating with me in the woods. You see?
Wow, yeah, that's yeah. So I've heard the same thing about the Sasquatch being guardians of the
Mm-hmm.
forest. So it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like an Ogun energy too. They always kind of
Right.
refer to him as a wild man. So what do you
Right.
think of that? Letting the viewers know, like this Sasquatch, this wild man. There's different accounts all over the world. Or in
Mm-hmm.
various parts of the world. You
Mm-hmm.
know.
That's interesting that you mentioned that because I was actually telling a friend about doing this show recently, and he literally he brought it up about the Sasquatch being connected to Ogun earlier today. You see, it's crazy how everything is just falling in place.
And then
And
you
you know
brought in
about
the Ogun energy, and I told him to grab my beads,
right. And now you
opening the
got the Ogun
way. You
Eleke.
know.
So yeah, yeah. So Ogun clears the way, clears the path so that you can go and navigate through the woods, into the forest. You
So,
see?
so yeah, I've kind of heard something about that. Some of the Sasquatch, they did not look like apes, but literally had humanoid faces or human faces.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so do you know where you want to go next? If not, I'll ask you something off the list.
Okay, yeah. Well, I just wanted to talk a little bit. I was going to go a little bit more about the history of
Okay,
this area. You
okay.
know,
And
you
one
know.
more thing, we have a Nashay and
Mhm.
Nashayla Gems. She's at the she's here for you. Hi, Babalawo Kephra Ptah brought me
Peace.
here. I'm excited to learn about Sasquatch. So, okay,
Nice, nice.
and
Thanks for coming.
thank you
I
for
appreciate
watching.
you.
Yeah. Okay, so you got it. You got the floor.
So basically, for thousands of years, right, the mountain was named Rainier, right? So this region was home to a group of natives, various nations. I rather say nations and tribes. You have like the Kolits, you have the Muckleshoot, you have the Nisqually, Puyallup, the Squatson. I think it's Squatson. Yeah, Yakima and the Salish people. Now they continue to keep that land today, and they have this relationship with the mountain, right? Known traditionally as Tahoma, right? Now you call it Tacoma. So those who live in the Pacific Northwest, that's where Tacoma comes from. So it's rooted in reverence, and it also deals with caution. Okay. Now, the National Park Service has noted that these communities have lived with and interpreted the mountain's volcanic activity for at least the past 10,000 years. I spoke to an elder of one of these nations, and he said that their people have been here for about 10,000 years, and that they used to hunt the woolly mammoth. Okay, and they deal with these
Wow.
areas as spiritual power peaks. Yes,
We
he
were talking
basically
about the
says,
woolly mammoth earlier. Remember, I had said like some of
"Mhm,
the extinct. So the woolly mammoth was in North America.
yep, yep,
Oh wow.
yep."
Okay.
So he said that his people used to hunt the woolly mammoth. That's how long his people had been here. I give a shout out to the elder Thundercloud. He's an elder that teaches, indigenous wisdom, and he also, man, he's that dude. He's got the dopest oracle I've ever seen that he made out of leather straps. Anyway,
Shout out to Thundercloud.
shout out to Thundercloud.
Mhm.
So indigenous oral traditions, they describe the Cascade volcanoes. Like, for instance, there's Mount Rainier that I've been talking about. There's Mount Adams, there's Mount St. Helens, and there's Mount Hoods. And they talk about these mountains themselves. They consider these mountains to be living beings. Now, if you know about a Yoruba tradition, mountains they call okay, they're linked to Obatala, and they deal with consciousness and elevation and spirit. So mountains are actually considered powerful beings according to these native traditions. And when they have like volcanic eruptions, they're engaged in ancient conflicts. So there's legends that recount mountains hurling rocks at one another in fiery eruptions, and a great flood that forced the pure-hearted to climb to the summits and ascend to the sky on ropes of arrows. Right? These stories emphasize that humans must not offend the mountain spirits. Because they said that their wrath, could literally reshape the land. So long before the word Sasquatch entered popular culture, indigenous people of this area, they told stories of this large, hairy, human-like being who lived in the deep woods among the coast, initially the Salish people. And these people, they called it Saskats, right? And later, they changed this word to Sasquatch. So while these stories were not specifically tied to just the Mount Rainier area alone, the mountains surrounding forests, the dense, remote, and spiritually charged area were understood as places where these beings dwell. Okay, so they have their lore about where these beings dwell in elevated places. Now, if you know about our traditions, as far as even in African spiritual traditions, they talk about mountain regions being areas where the wise Obatala dwells on top of the mountains. So the tip of mountains and high elevated places were always associated with spiritual ascension and wisdom, right? So art gaining the heights, so a mountain to amount to something, right? So when you raise your consciousness, that means you're amounting to a higher level of awareness.
Ascension. Wow. Yeah.
Ascension, exactly.
Mhm.
So These beings were sometimes seen as guardians, sometimes tricksters, and sometimes as warnings about straying too far into dangerous terrain. So today, you have stories about, like the late 19th and 20th century, um, when settlers and, loggers in Washington Territory reported seeing these beings. And although these accounts were not always tied directly to just Mount Rainier, this mass wilderness made it a natural focal point for such stories. So by the early 1900s, you had all these newspapers in Washington and even in British Columbia. They would publish reports about the wild men and mountain devils, and they would blend this indigenous lore with their own frontier mythology. So anyway, I know you had some questions. Feel free to go ahead and ask.
Mhm. Now that's interesting. Thank you. So far, um, I was just looking at we already went over like some of the names, even like Yeti and Yowie and
Mm-hmm.
these
Mm-hmm.
different. So would you say that like from the framework that you have, the Sasquatch would be like a biological species, possibly?
There are those who believe that they are a people, right? A literal people, right? But they're
Okay.
so intelligent and elusive that when, they detect humans, it says that they tend to retreat, so
Mm-hmm.
that people
Mm-hmm.
detect them. But they're said to be very intelligent. And one of the most famous Sasquatch related events that was recorded occurred around 1924 when a group of miners, I want to say Mr. Beck, Fred Beck, um, Lefevre, and John Peterson. They claimed they were attacked by this being, these creatures at a cabin near a place called Ape Canyon. Okay. And these are the slopes of Mount St. Helens. And you know about in the 80s how Mount St. Helens eventually erupted. Anyway, roughly 60 miles south of Mount Rainier is where you'll find this area. And though not on Rainier just itself, the story becomes part of the broader Cascade Range Sasquatch mythology and influences how people interpret strange occurrences throughout that whole region in the mountains. So by the late 20th century, you had writers such as Bruce Barcott. He wrote a book called Measure of a Mountain and explored Rainier's natural and cultural history and helped connect indigenous mythology and geological history and modern folklore into a cohesive narrative about the mountain's enduring mystique. Also, Barcott's work, it highlights how Rainier's geology and native stories and contemporary legends, including Sasquatch, all contribute to the mountain's identity as both beautiful and fearsome. So one of the things I tell people, that there is like a rich culture with its own wisdom teachings that you may want to tap into when you speak to the elders here, but you have to do it in a respectful way. Um,
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. I
mhm.
have a question. Do you think so since we're looking at the fact that they're you already said hominoid, so it's no need in me asking you if you think it's in the category of primate.
Mhm.
However, do you think it's connected to any of the apes, gorillas, or anything of that sort?
It's highly possible. It's
Like maybe
interesting because
an advanced ape, and maybe the it
mhm,
could have, I'm not, they could have did something, or it could have, like crossbred. They were already messing with the DNA and stuff since, doing
mhm,
whatever, they were
mhm,
saying certain experiments with like, cross. I guess it's a crossbreeding.
mm. Well, I mean, the NOI got their own story about that.
I know they
See,
do, and I
you
was gonna
know.
say even in the Bible though they were saying something about when was it Jacob or I don't remember, but he was doing the experiment with like the animals, the speckled sheep versus the brown and white. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. I'm just saying it could have been something scientific to it.
Hmm. Well, there's a lot of speculation and theory about that. About at one point in time, early in antiquity, there was a race of humans who had obtained God status in consciousness, but they began to experiment and create all these different beings. Some have speculated that that's how the centaur was born, whether it's half horse, half human, or the chimera, which is depicted as like an animal crossed with a lion, goat, and a snake, and all that. You know, but the thing about it is, you know, there's a different blending of stories that are literal, and sometimes these stories cross into the figurative. And, so you have to separate what is to be taken literal and what is figurative, you see. Um, the natives also talk about a group of giants that they go into war with. I mean, I want to talk about that a little later, but
Right.
you come to Seattle and the old curiosity shop over there by the waterfront, they literally have the skull of a giant in a glass case with an arrow sticking out of it.
Would you
Like
mind telling us a little bit about the Curiosity Shop and what that is?
Yes, if you come to Seattle, if you visit Seattle, go by the waterfront, just maybe Google the old curiosity shop, and you'll find all kind of stuff up in there, like anywhere from they found got two mummies literally in glass cases there. They got like the foot of like this tiny human that's only like this big, and they got like shrunken heads. It's a pretty interesting spot. Now, chances are you're not going to be able to purchase any of these things, but you'll be able to get a nice amount of souvenirs there if you come through.
That was
You know.
popular at Fisherman's Wharf, Pier 39, the Shrunken Head, and they had
Hmm.
it in like the museum. That's yeah, that's deep.
Hmm.
I don't even remember the story behind it because I was so young. It was just
Hmm.
like this mythology about it, or this story. Not even a mythology; it's a real head. I don't know.
Hmm.
Do you
Oh
remember
yeah.
it?
Well, shoot, I've seen it. Seen it like literally. Not only they got shrunken heads, but they got shrunken torsos, like literally in the case too. Yeah, all kind of stuff. Two-headed cats. They have a two-headed pig in a jar. Yeah,
Oh, that's
So
deep.
yeah, all
Okay,
kinds of stuff. So.
let me see anything else. Something else that came up when it comes to the Sasquatch, could it possibly be also something that the government is covering up? That actually came up also,
Hmm.
like about their existence and what's really going on in those
Hmm.
spaces. And you also spoke to me about a law, I believe you said, laws
Hmm.
against harming or hunting the Sasquatch.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a place
Let's
in
talk a little bit about
Washington.
that.
Yeah, there's a place in Washington called Skamania, and it's still on the books that you can be fined and you can actually get arrested if you shoot and kill a Sasquatch. You'll get persecuted with the full extent of the law for killing a Sasquatch. Yep. So that's on the books. So that means that somebody out there who even put down the law books believe that the Sasquatch is a real thing and not just a legend or a figment or a cryptid, a picture, figment of imagination and so on. So they
You
believe that this being actually exists.
you know what would
Okay.
be interesting?
Mm,
If you found some old treaties and see
mm.
if they had tribes that made stipulations with the white man that to protect certain energies and beings like that. Wouldn't that be interesting if that's something that they have certain ponds and stuff that people can't, it's for the natives. It's
Yeah.
or they may have yeah, things like that. Our rivers
Well,
are just areas.
again, the natives consider these beings a people. Okay. So the word Sasquatch is also linked to the word it literally breaks down to mean a hairy person or a wild human. That's literally what it means. So they don't consider the Sasquatch an animal. Now they're associated with the deep forest, and also spiritual danger. So once again, you see this Ogun type connection. But they treat this being with a lot of respect and caution, not worship. Pardon me. So there's no rituals or ceremonies or offerings or prayers, anything that's dedicated or directed to these beings. Okay. However, you got the First Nation among the area in British Columbia, where the community strongly associate with the Sasquatch today as the spiritual caretaker of the land. So they see this being as the spiritual caretaker. And it's also a transformational being that moves between the physical and spiritual world. They believe that this being can go in and out of dimensions, can come into our dimension and go out, blip in and blip out. So it's treated with great respect, similar to how one would treat bears or mountains or sacred spaces. Now, one thing that we have to understand is that human perception is limited because we see things based on our sphere of perception, a frequency range, and so on. So what can happen is that you got things that come in and go out of our frequency range that go beyond the five senses. But when your spiritual eye is open, that's when you're more able to detect these things. Otherwise, the brain is known to edit things out, especially if you've been programmed all your life to see things a certain way. So, for instance, you may read a paragraph and you may leave out a certain amount of words because your brain may actually consider these things to be unimportant. So we are editing things around us all the time with the five senses. There are people, I'll put it to you like this. Some people, their brains work in such a way to only accept what is considered normal, that if somebody stripped their clothes off and ran off butt naked down the street, their eyes would not see it. Their brain will literally edit it out because it's so foreign to the human imagination that anybody would run down the street butt naked with cars everywhere. But the brain will literally edit it out. So a lot of people, this event would never happen in their minds. You ready? Or it'll just they'll tune it out. Okay. We're
Yeah,
constantly
that's an
editing things.
interesting point you made there.
Hmm.
The frequency point. I didn't mean to cut you with, but I wanted to just speak on that a little more when you're ready.
Hmm. So yeah, so you got to deal with frequency, and you also got to deal with the various trance states in which we're in, which allows us to see things, hear things, and perceive things, and how we can actually tune those things out. Like even when you're dealing with people, if you're used to noticing them and thinking them a certain way, they can wear something different, and you may not notice it because your mind has them categorized a certain way. So a lot of us have categorized reality to function a certain way. So other people with us may experience a supernatural event that our minds will not perceive. I remember one time I seen a barn owl by the Seattle Center. That's rare in Seattle. You don't normally see barn owls flying around. The barn owl landed on the branch. Now, I believe this was a message for me because of all the spiritual work I was doing. There was a lady there, and I just needed somebody else to see it. I said, "Do you see that barn owl?" She looked at me like I was crazy. She did not see the barn owl. She looked at me and she said, "Nah, no, I don't see anything there." And it was not that far away. I'm talking about maybe very close, you know, and the barn owl was just sitting there. She could not see the barn owl, but I could.
Yeah, and I understand that frequency. That people are operating at different levels of awareness. So,
Right.
but that's interesting, because then it would be like as an archetype, and if it blinks in and out, is it something you can invoke if you know what I'm talking about? Because the people using it as that forest being, I know you say they don't worship it, but at this point, homage of some sort is paid to it because of the legacy of the being. So with that being said, I just thought that was an interesting point when you said about the frequency, the different levels. Some people aren't meant, even when it goes back to the people not finding it. When they
Mm-hmm.
said that, when you said that, certain people are like people hunting it or trying to use it as an experiment and things like that. They
Mm-hmm.
don't have the range to see it, so it could be hidden in plain sight even.
Exactly. Exactly.
Would
Could
kind
be
of
all
remind me of
around
the
us.
abominable snowman, because it's like, he's buried in all of the snow, so it could
Mm-hmm.
be there and you don't even know it's there. So I just wanted to comment on that. This is your thing, I want you to go ahead and give us some more on that. It's good.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
let's look at some of the other nations, like you have the Yakima and the Cowlitz and so on, and you got what is called the click attack traditions. Now, these particular nations, their stories, they speak about who are called the stick Indians and forest beings or the night people, right? And they talk about how these beings can whistle and mimic human voices and lure people away. And now these beings are said to be dangerous if disrespected and sometimes associated with kidnapping and spiritual testing. And what's interesting? Throughout the world, there's lore about certain beings that are known to be in the wooded areas, like even in Africa, where they talk about those who are going to deal with the teachings of Osirian, right? And they say that there's a being that they'll encounter that will take this person into the woods and teach them about the mysteries of plants. You see, so while these beings kidnap you, sometimes they'll kidnap you, teach you things, and bring you back. They're talking about sometimes instead of protective beings, they can also be warning you to avoid certain areas. You know, a lot of times they're told, hey, certain people need not to travel alone at night, and they may want to carry protective items with them, such as cedar, sage, or personal medicine. Okay, because this energy that comes from these particular herbs, whether they're burnt and so on, it gives a frequency that soothes the area. So there are also in indigenous cultures, the Pacific Northwest, you know, they don't treat, so when I say they don't worship them, it means they don't treat them as gods. They don't necessarily see them as ancestors either, but you know, but they do see them as forest people and spirit beings. So, you know, and guardians. Now, now they do have rituals, okay? The natives have plenty of rituals. They have rituals for their ancestors, for seasonal cycles and hunting and coming of age and healing and, you know, and honoring the mountains, river, the salmon. And, you know, the Sasquatch just simply doesn't fall into that category of receiving ritual attention on that level, you
Have
know.
you heard about them? I heard something about they have to share their hunters and things of that sort, so they have to share space. So when you said they didn't worship them and they don't see them as ancestors, it was something almost like they coexist with in the forest and they have to have a
Right.
common respect for each other. Is that what you?
Yes. Exactly. So it's more like a common respect. They recognize them, like I say, they
It's
see them as
clean.
another people, you know. So another thing is that you know, when you're dealing with the Sasquatch, it's talking about respect. It's all about respect. So when you're dealing with these beings, it includes speaking quietly in the woods and not leaving trash, right? Um, if you see these beings, you're not supposed to point at them, right? You're not supposed to even make jokes or mock the spirits. And you can offer thanks to the land before entering certain areas. Now, you can do that, right? So these practices, they all apply to these beings, but not just the Sasquatch, but also the spirits of the forest. So it's kind of like this thing that you just have to like literally respect the spirits of the forest anyway, you know? Now, if you check out like certain books, maybe some YouTube channels, um, there are people who claim that there are indigenous ceremonies around this, but they have been repudiated as not being authentic. And often they're seen as disrespect to the cultures that they claim to represent. So, I mean, that's something else that people have to be careful of, because a lot of times they'll take indigenous knowledge or indigenous wisdom and try to, you know, do their own thing with it. I don't know if you heard about one of I can't think of his name, but um, he was one of the people in The Secret, and he has took a whole bunch of people out there into the desert. He didn't know what he was doing. He tried to have a sweat lodge, and a bunch of people died up in the sweat lodge because he had like plastic bags and tires, and all this was creating toxic fumes, and the people up in there were choking off of that. And he
Yeah,
lost,
that's wow.
you
That's
know, so
crazy.
it's
Mhm.
you know, so it's like you really got to know what you're doing if you're going to be like, you know, paying respect to these traditions. So for those who want to get involved, you know, well, they have ceremonies and there's training and so on, from what I understand. You know, you might want to go to a few sweat lodge meetings. You might want to go to maybe a TP prayer meeting if you deal with the indigenous. But you have to kind of respect the way they do things if you want them to teach you anything, because they're not going to just lay it all out for you. You got to kind of like, you know, go through, you know, the works. So anyway, um, you know,
So, have
so
you studied any Jane Goodall? What do you think of her? Or do you
I
know
don't
anything?
really, I don't
No.
really know about her. No, no,
Okay.
no. But I'm be more than happy to learn about her.
I mean, we'll talk about Jane Goodall. She studied like the apes and the monkeys. She lived like amongst the monkeys and the apes. She believes that the Sasquatch are primates. So that she
Uh-huh.
has a different take on it, but she do believe that they're like real, for the
I
most part.
see.
Hmm.
I see. I see. Well, the thing about it is that there are those who believe that when humans, and I mean, you know, this is not gospel, okay? But there are those who believe that when humans were evolving, you know, there was like a separate species of hominid that evolved. So some still put man and woman in that process of hominid as far as being identified as a species and say, okay, well, the one group evolved into us and another group evolved into them. But these beings been cunning because at one point in time, humans and these other beings, these other species, will go to war with each other. So they decided that they didn't want to keep on fighting with us, and they went into the woods, they went to the mountains. They didn't want to have anything to do with us. Okay, so there's stories about that. I've heard stories about that as well. You know, so whether we can see them as another group of monkey and ape, we have seen that they're on all the continents just about in different stories. Like earlier, you talked about the Yeti. Well, the Yeti is basically a Sasquatch-like creature that's seen in Asia, right? So, you know, you got all these patterns, but a lot of researchers don't necessarily agree, but there is overlap. Okay, so that's something that we can look at
Okay.
to explore.
Yeah, like do you so I just wanted to ask another question. And I'm gonna give you a question from AI. Not my question, but I thought it was interesting.
Hmm.
Okay, so my question is, do you think that they could have possibly went extinct like dinosaurs or something changed in the climate, the environment, or they have always been just beings that like more like what we call elementals in like spirituality or in metaphysics?
Hmm. Well, it could be similar to elementals. There's the
Hmm.
idea of them being a spiritual being, and they may exist just outside of normal, regular perception. You see what I mean?
And Christine is
So,
at the bottom. I believe they are interdimensional beings like sea creatures.
yes,
Nessie or Champ.
yes. And you know what? That theory, and I believe in that possibility very well, is often because remember, we're dealing with frequency ranges and we're also dealing with the ability to come in and out of our dimension. So earlier spoke about how the natives say that they can enter the spiritual realm and come back into the physical realm at will. You see? So yes, in that case, we can say that they're interdimensional beings. And also remember, in some of these same areas, interesting enough, there's also been a lot of UFO sightings in these same areas. You know, now I'm not saying necessarily that Bigfoot is an ET. That doesn't necessarily mean that either. But these are the areas where there's a lot of spiritual phenomena and a lot of metaphysical phenomena, meaning that it's an area, um, a portal, you might could say, where interdimensions and certain things can intersect. Like,
I wouldn't rule it out totally though. You
mhm,
know, they had that one movie I was gonna try and see if I could pull it up. You remember it was like some kind of space gorilla movie or something, like a
right?
gorilla from out from another planet or outer space. And I also
Uh-huh.
think the Planet of the Apes is interesting. Just that
Uh-huh.
whole concept of where the apes are running the planet, even though we're saying that they're not apes, but these were still high dimensional beings in that
Mhm.
movie. So
Mhm.
even if it was something similar, like if they were cousins of,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, or just whatever. I think that they could have been, maybe they had a purpose. Because I really do believe that there was a time where this was a reptile planet. We were on the frequency of the reptile energy, where they were actually a consciousness that was the ruling consciousness, which is where a
Mhm.
lot of that's a whole nother thing. But I kind of I can see the interdimensional part or something of that sort as well. And thank you,
But there are,
Andrea, for your comment.
thank you, indeed, indeed. And and to piggyback off of Andrea's comment, there is like a small group of researchers who suggest that the Sasquatch could be a biological species, that are also monitored by UFO intelligences because there's something unique about them.
Well,
So
mhm. So that's
okay,
where that's probably why they're protected too, maybe by the government and everything, because they were saying it could be like the cover up or something.
right. Yeah, so they could be more than just just biological entities like we are, but we're not exactly just biological entities ourselves. It's just that we have forgotten our divine origin. We're spiritual and biological. You see what I mean? So let's say that you're dealing with a being that is still connected to nature to that level that they can elevate their consciousness in levels that the average human may not understand. And the worldview naturally overlaps with the idea of multiple realms and unseen dimensions. Now there are those who have spoke about government files that few and add to the mystery, like you mentioned earlier. Um, I'm going to do some research about, files that are reported from between the 1970s and even the 90s, and they talk about personnel reporting large humanoids near UFO landing sites. Okay, and also you're dealing with workers. I talked about the loggers earlier, and they talk about these big old huge footprints, right? That's why they call them Bigfoot, and they've been investigating this for a long time. But these are considered to be seen around aerial anomalies. You know, now hey, like you say, we won't rule it out. I mean, it'd be funny, like Gorilla Grodd in the Super Friends in the old, DC comics. It talked about a civilization of gorillas that were so advanced. It was like the gorilla version of Wakanda, and they could
Right.
actually read minds. Gorilla Grodd is supposed to have the ability to send his thoughts into another human's mind, or into human minds, and cause them to have illusions, and so
Well,
on.
that's what I'm speaking to with this so-called Planet of the Apes. There are so
Mm-hmm.
many different species, and the way they, even if it did have a human face, it could have still been a hairy being that existed in that type of dimension. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? Like the Planet of the Apes
Mm-hmm.
could be make believe, but I mean, it could not be too. I don't know how to explain it, but it's just another level of consciousness that I see that exists before us. We don't know what's all in the animal kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that the Sasquatch is a mammal?
Oh, definitely. From what I
Okay.
can see, it's definitely
Okay.
a mammalian being. So now they have some of the oldest recorded indigenous Sasquatch stories, that are found in these areas, like I mentioned earlier. Now, we're looking at these roots stretching back thousands of years, so you have many nations describing him. Um, there are some who will basically say that he doesn't exist because he just simply haven't seen him. But again, it's the wild man of the woods. Now you remember the end of that movie, Harry and the Hendersons, when they finally was able to let Harry go back to his family, all these Sasquatches came from behind the trees. It's like, whoa, and they were like literally in plain sight the whole time.
Yeah, that's what
Sometimes,
she said, a humanoid. That's what we were saying. Well, we said they were a hominoid. We was talking about out of the primate and hominoid, but she said a humanoid. Yeah.
mm-hmm.
That's
Well,
the
there's some who actually say that they're shapeshifters. Okay.
mhm.
So some believe that they're older than humans and that they're deeply connected to the land and that they're shapeshifters.
That's what
Shifters.
I'm trying to
Uh,
bring across
uh,
is what I'm saying. It's like before we came, you know how they
hmm
have different levels where they say the mineral kingdom, the
Right.
plant kingdom, the animal kingdom. What I'm stating is that it could be something that had its time here in a
hmm
certain level of evolution, and then it could have went into a different form because it can't exist in the environment that we may
hmm
now have. It could have been something just like when I brought up Planet of the Apes, not to suggest that they're apes, but that's just whatever the movie is stating. It could be something deeper than that, where
hmm
there was like a whole, like animals aren't just here making noises and stuff. They could have
hmm
lost their way to talk too, if you want to go back to those kind of things, like with
hmm
speech and tongue, or they may not have needed the tongue. It could have been a level of awareness, like Preda Mutwa said. Humans were at such a pure state when we were first created that we could just use our minds and third eyes to communicate. We knew who each other was on a soul
hmm
level. So
hmm
I'm just saying I don't believe that they didn't have a level of consciousness that they served a purpose. Is my point,
hmm
and I guess it went full circle and it was our turn or something. I don't know, but I don't know. That's just another theory because I don't know enough about it, but just
hmm Well, they also talk about, in their oral traditions. And these stories, they're very important because, it also talks about the relationship of these cultures with the land too, and how they see the land. So they have a lot of respect for this being, and they actually do believe that this being can communicate telepathically. There's also, you know, in these various traditions that talked about how man did not necessarily to need to use the tongue to communicate. And we got another
right,
group of
right.
beings who
That's what
may not
credible talk.
necessarily, you know. So you make a lot of sense.
Well, then it
Yeah,
goes back
animals that
to
have.
the tongue. You
Mhm.
know, the tongue or the curse of the tongue. I won't go into that, but life and death being in the power of the tongue. Or I heard that we didn't have as many curses on us when we
Mhm.
didn't have use our tongue. Once we
Mhm.
began to use the tongue, it's like there's a power to it that created all types of things, even things you don't want to create, because the tongue just wags, so
Yeah.
it's uncontrollable.
Yeah. Well, in the Sumerian text, it talks about how the gods became offended at humans because humans made too much noise. And if you go back into the Egyptian, the book of Coming Forth by Day and the Kemetic teachings, or the Purdue Haru, there's some writings by E. Wallace Budge where they translated it to say that what the netter hates is too much talking. So these traditions would suggest that we talk too much, right? A lot of mental chatter, and there's a hella chatter now because, well, we're constantly on social media. We don't give our brains any time to rest, and we're constantly got something blasting in our ears, so we don't ever take that time to go back to zero and be one with ourselves. A lot of us have learned to escape ourselves because we always have to have some noise. You see what I mean? And we're tuning ourselves out. So when you go into the woods, that's why you're kind of like instructed to be quiet and take some time to get to know yourself, because a lot of the voices that are in our heads are coming from elsewhere, whether it's the music being played over and over again in the club or on the radio, or or Hulu or whatever, not Hulu, but you know what I'm speaking about. Wherever you're listening to all this music, and it's not bad. Music isn't bad, but the problem is that you need to take some time to listen to the music within, you see. So one of the reasons why we're not able to see certain things is because we got so much chatter going on in our minds that we literally tune out everything and we're not mindful,
Yeah,
of
we
things
talk
going on
we talk a
within
lot
and
of
around
stuff.
us.
Yeah, we talk a lot of stuff. And
Hmm.
I just wanted to piggyback off that though. Is that's kind of going somewhere else, but it doesn't matter because it's all about being in a space to elevate moments to learn and share in spirit.
Yeah.
That's the reason why even as priests and priestesses, we're asked, and that's why I don't speak to many people, because the people, the ones that we're speaking to, when you say they ask us to be quiet, the
Hmm.
old magicians, the
Hmm.
old teachers, and people that really understood, because they understand our words are creating our world, it's creating your
Right.
reality. So if
Right.
everybody's talking, then you look at
Hmm.
what's happening around us, what's happening on the outside, why things are how they are. They understood that words were water, so
Yeah.
everything we say is creating. We've gotten to a point now that we're so like you said, we're not listening to the internal voice, that all we understand is the external voice, so we can't connect like that. But to this day, when we're locked in spiritually, we can still hear each other without speaking.
Hmm.
We can
Hmm.
still lock in, and it's strong.
Definitely. And there used to be a place where a group of Buddhist monks had across the water. It's called Vipassana meditation. And people stay there like up to 3 days or even maybe like a week, to my understanding. They eat like vegetarian food and they would not talk. You had to be quiet the whole time you were there. And I never got a chance to go to Vipassana, but I have taken time when I was very quiet, and I turn off the phone and everything else, and then I could get all these downloads. A lot of times when you're waking up, between your waking states time and your sleep time, between those two thresholds, when it's very quiet and you're relaxed, that's when you start getting downloads, you see. So a lot of times when you
Mhm.
first wake up, you're getting downloads, and when you start moving, that's when you start losing the downloads and you start forgetting your dreams. So next time you're laying in the bed and you're getting these downloads and these thoughts coming together, just lay in bed for a minute and gather them up and try to write them down, because when you start getting active, you're going to start forgetting these. Okay. um, Something else too, I think, I'm glad she brought up the thing about the interdimensional travel too, because the Pacific Northwest, okay, and I wanted to tie that into my experience with the firemen. It's always been understood to be a spiritually charged landscape as well, okay? And this was long before people came up with these theories about ley lines. The indigenous nations here, they recognize how the mountains, rivers, and forests were places where there was a veil between worlds, and that this is what is veiled within in these areas. So these locations that I spoke about, they were used for vision quest, right? Now, if you're familiar with like how we function, we have to dream, right? We dream if you stay up 3 days in a row, right, without going to sleep, then you're going to start hallucinating because that's the subjective realm coming up to the surface, the subjective realm coming to the objective realm. So sometimes they use like certain herbs that will keep you up, right? And for those, like if you're familiar with peyote, when I went through my first peyote ceremony, I discovered that I could stay up and not feel sleepy, you see. So if you stay up long enough, you will start to have that subjective realm come to the surface. Anyway, modern researchers also talked about the energy grids. That's the other side of the equation, and earth currents, and many of these alignments would pass directly through these ancient sacred spaces. So imagine if you're going to a herb or like peyote and so on, and you're staying up, and you have an intention on connecting to your power animal and your spirits and the ancestors and so on. You'll have visions and things that come to you. So this overlap has led many to suggest that this region's supernatural phenomena, including the Sasquatch encounters, may be tied to not only someone who may be going through a spiritual transformation, but also the energetic structure of the area itself. Okay, so these are two things. They're two different things, but they can intermingle. Another thing is that
Mm.
mountains being gateways, and like I talked about these mountains earlier, many nations describe these mountains being not only beings and guardians, but places of elevation and ascension in consciousness. Well, if your consciousness is ascending, then that means you're raising your vibration, you're raising your frequency, and different faculties within you begin to awaken. A lot of us rely on our five sense perception because that's what we've been taught and trained to do. We went to this Western education system. But when you strip yourself of all that, right, and go to your natural state of being, remember, even in their colonial religions, they teach that in order to enter the kingdom of heaven, one must become as a child again. But what does that mean? This is before you were conditioned and told that this doesn't exist, and you have to hold the pencil with your right hand a certain way before they start conditioning you. Your imagination was also connecting you with spirit guides, right? A lot of times people call them imaginary friends, but a lot of times the children would actually be connecting with spirit guides and beings in the other dimension. And sometimes parents would literally be alarmed that the child tell the parents about something that only they would know about themselves and tell them that Bobby told them. Like, well, who is Bobby? Says my friend,
The
right?
imaginary friend.
Right, right. The Yoruba tradition, we call these beings Egbe
Egg
because they're the
Bay.
beings that never incarnated, but they're
Yes.
around you and they're
Yeah.
playing with you incarnating. A lot of times when children have to, be connected, and your child might be suffering from not being able to fit in because that child is so connected with the other side. So when there's a reading that comes up in Ifa, a lot of times someone is saying, hey, you need to throw a party for your child, or you need to throw a party for children that appease the egg bay, and so on. Okay.
Okay, so thank you for that. That's and I yeah, I'm
Mm-hmm.
very familiar with Egg Bay. That's
Mm-hmm.
also part of my frequency, okay? But we have I was the only child.
Yeah.
So,
Mm.
Andrea, Christina, she says, I live in Roswell, New Mexico, and she got the
Mm-hmm.
flying saucer emoji. We are
Nice.
on certain lines on the earth as well as the opposite side of the world
Uh-huh.
that the Bible said the angels fell.
Mm. Mm. You know, my father used to mention about how people will sometimes conflate angels and aliens. Okay, he believed that he believed that people would see angels, and that the people would see extraterrestrials and call them angels and deities and so on. Right. So he had that belief. Now he used to study the works of Zachariah Sitchin and the other guy that I think his name was Eric von Däniken. He was into what's
Yeah, that's
called
his
the
name.
the ancient astronaut theory, right?
Right.
So And speaking of ley lines, now ley line theory proposes that the Earth is covered by, for those who don't know, it's covered by geometric networks of subtle energy pathways. Kind of like in your body, you have these subtle energy channels, these meridians, and so on. Well, so does the Earth. So this framework has been applied to like the Pacific Northwest to explain the sacred sites mentioned earlier, like volcanic peaks and on hotspots where all these appearances have been documented. So some researchers propose that beings like the Sasquatch may use these energetic pathways the way animals use migration routes. Okay. Others suggest that these lines would create thin places where interdimensional or spiritual entities can cross over. The idea resonates loosely with indigenous teachings, but it describes the Sasquatch as a being who can appear and disappear again. And these beings are not bound by ordinary physical laws. And what's interesting too is that those who see extraterrestrials, like the sister I mentioned, Roswell, earlier, you know, they supposed to have found the bodies of these beings after the ship had crashed, and they had basically taken these bodies and put them in Hangar 18 in Area 51, right? And that's what we've been told. Now, those who encounter these beings often say that these beings have the ability to come in and out of our frequency range, you see? So I had an experience when I was young, when I was suffering, or not suffering, but I was having all these nightmares. I was feeling presence in my room. I see all this green energy. I was seeing my own aura. Okay, that's what I was seeing. And there was a time when I could feel this presence in the room, and it kept feeling really cold. I felt like my ears was throbbing, and the hair on the back of my neck would raise. So I couldn't go to sleep. I tried to keep myself up, right? But something happened where the walls in my house started swaying back and forth. Next thing you know, I'm walking down this hallway, and I'm hearing them play this music. They were playing Fame from, if you remember that old school song, Fame, I'm gonna live forever, I'm gonna learn how to fly. Interesting
Debbie
lyrics, right?
Allen
Right,
and
right.
Leroy.
You know, so you remember the names. See? Yeah, yeah, you got
That
that.
was my favorite show. Where you think I got the name Coco from? From Fame.
Oh, okay, okay, gotcha. So you know
my,
exactly what I'm talking about.
yes,
So,
my mom called
so,
me Coco
mhm.
from Fame.
Okay, okay. Hey, I had my god auntie used to call me Kojak because I was a little bald-headed baby. So she's like, look
The
at my
bald
little
headed guy.
Kojak. Yeah. She's like, look at my little Kojak. She thought I was a cute little Kojak look-alike.
I remember
So,
that.
you
I was
know,
very young.
mhm. So, you know, the dream that I was having or the experience I was having, I'm walking down this hallway. I see this being with a large, elongated head. And nobody else noticed this being but me. I woke up laying in my bed. Apparently, I guess I did go to sleep, but I couldn't move. I looked out the corner of my eye and I saw this being standing by my bed. This being went into the wall and went pow and made a large noise like a balloon popping, and it scared the living shit out of me. I screamed and I screamed, and my mother ran into the room and I told her what I had experienced. This being went inside the wall, okay? That's what it did. Now, whether what I seen was a gray alien, I'm not quite sure what that was, but it looked very much like a gray. Only difference is that when I woke up from whatever that state I was in, the being was like silhouetted black, okay? Like pitch black when it exploded into the wall, but it resembled the being that I seen in a dream. And when I woke up, to my horror, it was standing by my bed, okay? So these things, and I used to see a lot of shadow people too. All right. So coming from a spiritual family, I used to see a lot of spirits. Now, I have a friend of mine, you know, I won't put his name out there, but he sent me a picture of when he was in a wooded area with some friends. And when he was by the trees, he heard a spirit or something was saying his voice. I mean, saying his name. He could hear a human voice and it was saying his name. He took a picture of it. Now, I'm going to find that picture. I'm going to send it to you and I'm going to have you expand on it. He saw it with his
I would
mind's
love
eye.
that.
I'm gonna send it to you. In
I would
his
love that.
mind's eye, he saw this being, and he saw this being as being like green with big old eyes. Okay. Guess what? He took the picture, sent it to me. He was talking to his friends. If you expand the picture in the background, you see a head floating, and it's green, and you see big old eyes. And you said that's the being he saw in his vision when he was in the woods.
Wow.
You see,
Yeah.
so so it's highly possible, and I believe that this being could be semi-spiritual. And the reason why I'm leaving it open, right? Because I want people to kind of like look into it, investigate, and see what they can find. Because from what I can see, a lot of times the universe has a way of giving you clues to have you go on a quest and a journey. So you will seek your own knowledge and awareness and come up with your own story about what you experience. So I think it's good to listen to what the indigenous people have to say. Now, you heard of the Watchers. The indigenous people, the Salish, they call these beings the Watchers of the deep forest and the protectors of the sacred lands. But when you look at these modern ley line maps, they show intersections near these areas, okay? And they seem to be sacred areas, and it raises an intriguing possibility. And that possibility is that the Sasquatch is associated with places of high levels of energy and vibration and frequency, spiritually significant. And in this view, the Sasquatch is not just so drawn to the energy, okay, but it's part of it. You see? So
Mhm.
And the reason why now I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, so I don't mean to be biased, but I'm going by what I see and what I heard and what I've researched and what I've talked to people about. You know what I mean? And what I was able to look at, because I did a lot of looking into this, especially recently. And the reason why I got my attention recently is
Mhm.
because my father passed away like a year ago, okay?
Mhm.
Or actually in June. And the thing about it, he was deep into Native American spirituality as well. Okay. And he used to talk about the star people a lot, and he would know some stuff about indigenous tradition. Well, it looked like after he passed away, and I spoke to him, right, when I set up my ancestors, and that day I kept on running into the Sasquatch, pictures and images of the Sasquatch. And I'm like, well, Dad, what is it that you're trying to tell me? Because I ran into other things that let me know that it was him communicating with me because his spiritual name was Mikael. So I opened up a book when I went to a souvenir shop where they had the Sasquatch all over the place. And I opened up the book and it said Mikael. I said, okay, Pops, I get it. There's something that you want to show me. There's something that you want me to look at. And my father, when he was alive, always said that he wanted to go to the wilderness and get out of the city because he believed that these cities were pretty much death zones from his perspective. Anyway, he would know about vortex locations and so things of that nature. And these were these areas where these people would report all these unusual sensations, strange light, and guess what? Time distortions, along with heightened levels of intuition. So I can also attest for this myself based on what I experienced when I took my own trip and was camping at the base of Mount Rainier. So the vortex theory, some people may say it's some recent stuff. The experiences people describe often echo indigenous accounts of what we call power spots. Now, if you're familiar with Kimbanda, or if you can, in certain African traditions, in Kimbanda, now Kimbanda is Afro-Brazilian, right? And it talks about these 7 places, these 7 power spots that are connected to 7 kingdoms, where there's 7 different types of spiritual energies.
No,
And right,
I don't know about
so
that. If you want to share a little bit.
mhm.
But what else do they do out there? I thought it was what did you say? Say the word again. Did you say Ubanda with a U?
Well, there's Umbanda and there's Kimbanda.
Okay, I've never heard of
Umbanda,
Kimbanda, only Umbanda.
Umbanda would be the right hand path, and some people say that Kimbanda was the left hand
The
path.
left hand path. Okay.
Basically, so Kimbanda was basically the aspect of it that they went to war with their oppressor because these were the brothers and sisters who had been captured and brought to Brazil. So what they did is that they connected with the Yoruba Eshu with the Congo traditions, and they mingled that with the indigenous traditions there. So they have what you call the Pretovelas, which are considered to be the ancient blacks with the ancient wisdom of the black people, and then he had what you call the natives. They would call them caboclos. So they had special regard for the ancient blacks and the caboclo spirits and gypsy spirits and so on. So they kind of combine all that into a cosmology, and that's where you get the Umbanda and the Kimbanda, you see. So they talk about seven kingdoms, like there's a kingdom of the beach, there's a kingdom of like the cemetery, the kingdom of souls, the kingdom of the lyre, which is basically, I guess the musical aspect. I'm from the kingdom of the beach. In the Yoruba tradition, I was from the water kingdom, so I'm connected with water spirits and so on. However,
Absolutely. You said
right,
the Larry, you're speaking to the instrument just so people won't think you're
yeah,
saying the kingdom of the liar.
right, right,
Just
right,
just
right,
yeah,
yeah,
that's
uh-huh,
probably a kingdom
yeah,
as well, but
right, right. I'm sure there is. I mean, there's a kingdom of the seven crossroads, a kingdom of the all that kingdom of the crossroads. And for some reason my brain is not capturing all the seven kingdoms, but basically
so
you
would
get the
you say
idea.
that, not to cut you off, but to kind of go back to what you were saying, because we're speaking about the water. I'm connected to beach energy as well, but
Uh-huh.
would you say that that would make you more vibrating with marine energy, or is that something different to you?
Well, I definitely vibrate with marine energy, you
Meaning
see.
like the kingdoms that they're speaking to in Brazil,
Yeah.
is that part of the marine kingdom as well?
Yes, definitely. So it's like, for instance, in the water kingdom, they call it the praia because it's the kingdom of the beach. They call the
Mhm.
kingdom of the beach that goes into the ocean, the connection with what they call the larger Kalunga, and they call the cemetery the lesser Kalunga because it is believed that you can contact more spirits in the ocean than so much even the cemetery. Okay, because you have lost whole entire lost civilizations in the ocean.
And you
The
still
mysteries
have the
of the
life
waters.
and death in the ocean together.
Correct. Uh-huh.
You know.
So. Mhm. Definitely, definitely.
So speaking of the
So
ocean, life and death in the ocean, this is off, but hey, we're gonna tap on a little bit of pop culture. Have you heard about the dolphin guy and this whole thing that's going on TikTok and everything, and it was in the news? He was
well,
under the guy that was under the water for 3 days, and he's saying that
mm,
the dolphins instructed him to build underground kingdoms.
I believe him. I'm gonna tell you why.
I do too.
In 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 the tradition of Mamiwata, it speaks about, and this goes back to those who say that they were kidnapped by forest beings and being educated and taught. Well, the Water Kingdom does that too. They've been known to like educate people, chosen ones, and then teach them knowledge, and then send them back with knowledge, right? So dolphins. If you're familiar with the story of the Nomo or the Dogon, some say that the Nomo resemble dolphins. Some believe that they resemble dolphins. Now, dolphins have been known to see a human being struggling in the water and have been known to rescue that human and bring them back onto the surface. So they're very intelligent. You know, they did with their families similar to how we would do with our own families. That is, if we were healthy. Right now
Mhm.
humans are seeming like we're having a problem maintaining our families because we're letting this beast kind of like, well, I'm not going to say we're letting it. I'll just say that this beast, this negative energy has been doing everything it can to keep us divided up. You see what I mean? But the
I'm
animal kingdom,
listening.
especially with the dolphins represent a spiritual consciousness. Even if you go into a lot of spiritual circles, you'll see where the dolphin are considered to be very spiritual creatures. So I have no
They are.
doubt, I had
As a matter of fact, they
experienced.
said that one of the elder beings are dolphins, and when you talk about Dogon, they were saying that humans are connected, and a certain
Mm-hmm.
group of dolphins used to come up. You remember? Used to come
Mm-hmm.
up out of the water ever so many hundreds of years or whatever it was, and they do this strange noise. I don't know if you heard that. They they stand in a circle on the beach, and they would
Mm-hmm.
make this interesting noise. They were saying it was almost like one of the first life forms, almost like
Mm-hmm.
a mother, ancestor or something. I don't really know how to
Mm-hmm.
explain it, so I haven't tapped into it too deeply. But that's really interesting because the guy said he was speaking to this dolphin with clicks.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was interesting because they have the sonar energy and they connect on the level of sound frequency.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Definitely. Yes.
We have to tap on that another time, the dolphins. But anyway, is there anything else that we haven't touched that you really wanted to get into about Sasquatch? Or
Yeah, I just wanted, there's something that I wanted to talk about as far as like I think I talked a little bit about time distortions. Um, but the thing about it is this caused me to want to look a little bit more into the energetic gateways that they have been seeing in these areas, you know, because if we have non-ordinary beings that can move in between time and space, it may give merit to what the Dogon actually say when they ask, well, how? Because they said they came from that star in Sirius. They said, well, how did you come from Sirius to Earth? They said we walked.
so would that kind of that's deep, real deep. So would that tie into these conspiracies that they have out now about space being the ocean and the ocean being space?
Well, I mean, it could intersect to a degree. I tend not to take conspiracy theories um, in its entirety because there's a lot of information out there that contradicts because you're basically dealing with people perceiving things in different ways, so however ancient Kemites identified space with the ocean. Okay,
Right. That's
there's
what I
now there
mean.
is
Like,
okay, so there's
mm-hmm.
little water, there is water in space. Okay,
Absolutely.
right.
And they got
So
ships in space and ships in the ocean. It's a whole
yeah,
bunch of different correlations with this the water and space in
right.
the ocean.
Well,
Yeah.
even the ancient Kemites, they looked at the Milky Way. They believed that the Milky Way, because the way the Milky Way looked, they considered that to be the Nile River in space. That's the way they looked at that,
That's real
So
deep. Hmm.
mm. Another thing too is there's also the shapeshifters, and I think that's something that's very, very popular in indigenous culture too. And you also find that if you're familiar with the Iami. They talk about how these beings were women who could transform themselves into birds and so on, right? And they have very, very powerful Yami Osorunga. Well, they talk about a lot of shape shifting in Native tradition as well. Sometimes they talk about physical shape shifting, and sometimes just what we call spiritual shape shifting. Now, there has been people that I have met who will go through some type of situation where it's a traumatic experience or maybe a spiritual experience, and they become a whole entire different person. It's almost as that they swap spirits, right?
Would
You
you
know.
just to ask a question on that and because my mind is always going as you're talking. So
Right?
so like what if this shape shifting was just a form of truly like mastering energy at its highest point? Like
Mm.
understanding how atoms work and everything, and a level of frequency is so high they can damn near shift into I don't know. I know that's kind of deep to conceive, but when you think about it from an energetic level and because of the biological part, like what
Mm.
happens to the physical body, but then it can be time perception again. We talked about
Mm.
frequency, that other people may see them as a regular person and someone else could recognize them as a bird.
Yeah. Well, the thing about it is, I have reports of people levitating. I had a teacher, okay, he's a comedic teacher who literally had the ability to use his mind and push me, and he almost knocked me on my ass. And we were on a Zoom call. He said, try to stand still. And I couldn't. He was pushing me with his mind. You see, we got to keep in mind that we are not just these biological entities, but we're also consciousness that have taken form. You see, and we think about spirit. Spirit, the so-called modern terminology calls it consciousness. We recognize consciousness as spirit. Consciousness cannot be erased, it cannot be destroyed. Consciousness is always going to find a way to express itself through these vessels that we call bodies. So there's no death. You can't die. You can only be recycled, reformatted, and just express yourself in a different way. Remember, I told you about the person I was learning Qigong with. when I go to some of his workshops, I got to the point that I could feel my consciousness inside of the bodies of other people. And I could tell when someone had injured themselves and they've been through an injury. I go up to this person and send them energy to heal those areas and those parts of their body. So we are not just these physical forms. And of course, if we reach a certain level and you master the elements and you go beyond this physical matter, or understand this physical matter is just light energy slowed down into a crystallized form, then why wouldn't you be able to transform and shapeshift?
I agree. I agree with it. I just think it's more condensed energy, like wherever, where a wall is there.
Exactly.
Because they talk about
Exactly.
people breaking putting their hands through wood and stuff, like breaking
Yes.
in karate and martial
Yes.
arts, and people being able. I've heard in Africa, the Diaguara tribe, they talk about walking and hitting rocks, hitting certain
Mm-hmm.
portals. Baba Tunde, my priest, also spoke today, or my teacher. My priest is his uncle, but uh, we talked about certain portals that you can walk right through it if you
Right.
understand certain frequencies, and also sometimes it's words, certain things you could say with high vibration that go back to us talking again, though, and dummying down. That's why I said we can't misuse the medicine,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
overuse our medicine.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to address that too. She said the air is water. It is. It's condensed
Mm-hmm.
water.
It is. That's the reason why we can basically speak and be heard, because as we speak, it's the water molecules in the air that allows the sound to travel, because sound doesn't just travel
Mm.
in a vacuum. You see?
Mm.
So there's
And she said
science
some
behind that.
some shamans can, yeah, absolutely. Shamans as well can, they know the portals. They call them hot spots. The places
Right.
you were saying certain kingdoms in the planet or something. That
Mm-hmm.
some
Mm-hmm.
cultures call them hot spots on Earth, and
Mm-hmm.
those are the places where sometimes even machinery won't work
Mm-hmm.
because, and I heard that about Sasquatch. Sometimes the people may not have seen them, the ones that are going and hunting them down and everything,
Mm-hmm.
but certain things will go wrong in that area where they can't violate that boundary.
Yes, yes. They're not allowed to. Some things are going to remain hidden until until our species is ready to perceive it. And only a few will be allowed to perceive it at a time. You see what I mean? Just like they can't measure chi. You mentioned about karate being to put your hand through a log. Notice, if you learn like karate or you learn like a martial arts, they'll tell you, okay, try to punch this board. You punch your board and hurt your hand. They'll say, okay, now see yourself punching through the board. Then you hit the board, you hit it harder, right? Or even maybe split the board because your mind is connected to that. What's the first hermetic principle? It says the all is mind, the universe is mental. They
All
call
is
that
mine.
mentalism,
Yeah.
right?
Mentalism.
Hmm.
Mentalism.
But if
Absolutely.
we you see, if we keep on repeating to ourselves that we're advancing, we're getting better and better, you know, I believe that's really the science of repetition in prayer, because you're doing these affirmations. If you're constantly saying that you're a sinner, you don't deserve to have any type of benefit in God and so on, because you used to be guilty about what your ancestors did. Somebody ate an apple and now you're fucked up. You need to understand something, and that is you are basically chastising yourself, and you're keeping yourself from being able to elevate and actually experience the whole idea of being filled with the Holy Spirit, as you talk about. In other words,
Yes.
you have to empty your cup in order for yourself to let Spirit pour into you. You see what I
I,
mean?
I love that. Yeah, I love that. She said, and to realize that nothing is solid. They go back to the atoms, just that whole
Right,
construct of what's
right,
holding everything together. So if you can understand the frequency of what it is that you're trying to perceive. Like when you were talking
right.
about the interdimensional aspect of the Sasquatch, I even thought about Paul because I've seen it. I've been in frequencies that high where you can see a
Hmm.
glimpse of another kingdom that exists right here. There's
Right,
kingdoms that exist right here, on right where
right,
we are. You know,
right.
so it's like but the frequency won't allow you to see it. That's why he was only allowed to see the glimpse because that wasn't his frequency. So it
Hmm.
dropped,
Right.
if you want to look at it, even if you don't believe in the Bible, but even as a
Hmm.
metaphor or a teaching, a place of teaching, he wasn't on that frequency. It wasn't his
Right.
frequency. So he could only see the glimpse of what could be if he would allow his energy with that frequency, to be able
Exactly.
to have the sight, to see
Exactly.
it. And the
Exactly.
thing is, like you said, we could probably see more, but we have so many other things. And you hear a lot of people like Dr. York and others that talk about the etymology of the word. So certain
Mm-hmm.
things that, and even Master Teacher Sun Ra, he talked about dead languages, languages
Mm-hmm.
that don't even go anywhere. We don't even need to really be using, or
Mm-hmm.
languages that maybe could have went. So he talks about the dead language and just how
Mm-hmm.
languages also live languages that continue to mean other things. And so not even understanding the origin of what we're saying and what spells we're casting.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
You know,
Indeed. And the universe itself speaks a language. So it speaks about, universe, or you and I verse all. Our universe, the one verse, the one
the
song,
one
the one
word.
phrase, right?
Yeah,
And also meaning turn into one, because the universe is also constantly turning, rotating, and evolving. You got these tiny torsion fields that they speculate. It's speculatory, but the torsion fields is believed to actually make up, also this holographic aspect of the universe in which we live in. Um, Now you got to ask yourself something. If we're held together with 14,000 pounds of pressure per square inch, how is there empty space between every atom? You see? So, yes, the idea of that being solid.
what is space? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how big is space? Could it
Mm-hmm.
be? You know what I mean? Like once, because look at how small these little skin cells are.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Exactly.
like, is it something that's so little? Like, if we look underneath the microscope, we'll literally see spaces. Or
Mhm.
does that make
And
sense?
yes, and what you might also see under the microscope is what appears to be fractals, basically smaller versions of the larger whole, looking smaller and smaller and smaller, resembling, the larger component in which you're seeing. Basically, fractals are basically smaller version of something, or self-similar parts of the whole.
It's kind of like this man, this guy said one time years ago, one of my friends, I can't even remember who said it. He said, yeah, he said, just think about it. We were talking Bible. And he said, God knows every hair on your head. He said, we have so many hairs, it's black. You know, when you think about that, because it takes way more than one hair to make it black or gray or blonde or whatever it is. You have to have a whole bunch, like to
Right.
fill in, you
Facts.
know
you
to even
know.
so like even when you're talking a little the totality versus what we're zoning in on,
Hmm.
so what would be
Hmm.
your answers to atoms of why how there's space in between?
Well, if we live in a holographic universe, right? Notice how you have what is this whole galaxy, right? Looks like an atom, right? And then within the atoms, within the galaxy, you have smaller solar systems, right? Also smaller vortexes. And then you keep on going for smaller, and what you see is you've got smaller versions of a mimic the whole. As far as we can know, the atoms, what we're looking at, could be various worlds, the electrons and everything else evolving around the nucleus. Those could be worlds as far as we know, and
Absolutely.
universes and things of that nature.
I put the
So
comments there so you can read if you want. Christina has another interesting one here. I call it a Christina. It's Andrea Martinez, so she may want to be called Andrea. Uh,
mhm.
but it says in Toltec spirituality, it's called the Nagil, the space between the tonal physical.
Uh-huh. The
Did you
concept of
want to say something
Nagual.
about it? Hmm.
Mm, mm. You know, I and I'm somewhat a little bit familiar with Toltec material, just a little tiny bit, but years ago I learned about the Nagual. Years ago, I had a shaman explain that something similar to me. Um, what it is when it comes to shamanism is you're able to connect with what is called the underworld, because you're tapping into the unseen dimensions of self. The shamans were the prophets of old. They were the ones that were able to see beyond this realm and into the next realm. And they utilized either forms of meditation and herbs to put them in a trance and things of that nature. The thing is that we have taken a lot, or should they have say they have taken a lot of the medicine that was utilized for divine experiences and turned them into drugs like LSD and cocaine and pharmaceuticals. Remember, pharmacology or the pharmacy or pharmakia actually comes from a word which means sorcery.
Sorcery, correct. Yeah, sorcery.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. When they talk
So,
about witchcraft, the pharmaceuticals would went against the natural.
hmm
I need to. I want to make that announcement, but I'll wait. But I do. I'm ready to. I'm gonna do that panel too. So if you are interested in just speaking to that subject, and anyone else out there that may want to weigh in and come on the live on a Metaphysical Monday, I'll let you guys know. It's gonna be we're gonna open up the panel for the taboo nature of witchcraft and spirituality, and we're gonna tackle it in a way that's very unique, not in a way to scare people, but in a straight space for teaching and understanding, and people being able to feel safe
Mhm.
and get questions answered, because they you never know who's a witch, so people have to be mindful of the names we call people. You don't know,
Mhm.
even in your church. I'm just
Right,
saying.
right. And we got, and and the thing about it is that um, even with the word witch, it once meant wise woman, but they've taken it and demonized the term. Basically, what they do is that they demonize everything and get you to dislike it and hate it, because they didn't put that devil connection to it. And
And for me that's
you
very deep, and it goes back to what you said about I just want to close, well, for what I have to say on that is they when you were speaking about being indoctrinated, about us being so indoctrinated, just like when they told us that we can only use a third of our brain or whatever
hmm
we're being told. People are so lazy too, and we just give so much, especially us, black people, because of what we've been through, or if you
hmm
want to consider yourself melanated or whatever.
hmm
um but and people in general, because we just accept almost like the government is God. So
hmm
whatever they tell us, that's all we accept, even our
right,
parents to a degree. And we never go any further than that. So you don't believe you can fly because you were told you could never fly.
right,
So
indeed,
it goes
indeed.
into that, limits our evolution as well, because we never exercise these other things. And in everything that's outside of that, that someone may master or achieve, they're calling it supernatural or witchcraft or something else, when it's actually a natural ability that human beings can literally possess, like a sixth sense, right?
Indeed, indeed. And I mean, chi obviously exists to the martial artist. If you can I've seen somebody like take an iron pole and bend it, and it was like being pushed into their throat, and it would bend, right? And you try to bend it with your hand, you can barely do anything with it. I've seen people do that. I've watched people, martial arts and practitioners, do these things. So, a lot of it is really done with the mind. See, they're trying to say because they haven't been able to measure with their equipment. I believe that they have, but they're not going to show you that. You know, you cannot measure chi with, just the modern technology that you see around you, right? But it exists. They just haven't given you access to the technology that can measure it, because they're not going to tell you that, because they want you to go along with conventional science, because it keeps your mind limited. That way they can play games with you and have you go and work and be a slave, because you don't believe that you have the power to do anything different.
They definitely can measure it, just like they measure gravity, just like they can measure sound
Mhm,
vibration and anything
mhm,
else like that. Now, a couple more statements here. Witches had an ointment that made them astral project, otherwise fly.
mhm,
Now, this is from Andrea again,
mhm,
and then she said there's a tribe in Africa that are flying men, and we know even on the plantation there was some groups. Not every tribe or nation that they said, you even had a book about it called "The People
mhm.
Could Fly." You
Right. Yep.
know,
Hmm.
so
Right.
again, the science. I mean, think about that. I don't want to go off too much, but you know how we are in the conscious community. We just go where it land, right? Even in the church, some black people, we just be talking. You know how it can go. But even the walls of Jericho, if we want to say
Hmm.
that's something that's actually happened, then that was a form of sound vibration. That mean they had these sciences mastered long ago, as we know, even in
Yeah.
Kim and all of in the ancient tech civilizations,
Hmm.
Atlantis and different things like that. So it's not like we just lost a lot of those things.
Right.
Also, because they know how dangerous it is. Because like I would say, some of this power, every knowledge is not for everybody to know, because it could be dangerous, it could be harmful,
Hmm.
in the wrong
Hmm.
hands. So it's almost like you have to have laws that govern it. Like almost like like if we lived in a space where we can openly practice our energy work, there would still need to be people that's in higher of knowledge to be able to control what's going on, or people will be out of control,
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
not in
Hmm.
harmony.
Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why they make sure that they have limited your education as much as possible.
Hmm.
You see,
Hmm.
and they're not planning. If they do change the system, right, it's because they figured that they have created so many levels of control that they can go and, yeah, they can tell you this now, you know, after they have
Hmm.
locked so much down. That's when they
Hmm.
want to come out with the information. But the thing about it is that once you tap into who you are and who you truly are, then you'll be able to perceive all these things without them needing to tell you anything.
They don't
You
have
know,
to. Hmm. Hmm.
so that's the thing, and that's the secret. That's why someone has been trying to control your access to spirit with fear and teaching you about jealous gods who want to mess you up if you start asking too many questions or if you deal with other deities, when in fact there's allness, you know? So, how does your oneness and your belief in oneness, how does that, you know, trump my belief in allness? I see allness as being the divine.
The all in all. And that's what I was just
Indeed.
telling this Hebrew Israelite, shout out to him if he's watching. Is that's why we don't say the one. Hermetics teach us the all in all because all things are
Right.
in the all.
Right.
If
Right.
you got the all, you got everything. And so if you
Hmm.
say the one is like limiting God
Hmm.
and saying that
Right.
there's some other energy that is competing with that, and even if there are other gods, it's still within the all.
Hmm. Indeed. Now you also deal with certain pantheistic traditions where you talk about the many, the one that is the many, and the many that is the one. But remember earlier when I spoke about my experience at the Qigong workshop, and I could experience my consciousness within the bodies of others, and this is something that I mentioned before. When you think you have died, all you have done is you've left this physical form, but you can shift reference points, references. So your identity is a reference of consciousness. There is no death. You can't die. That's what I mean by that. Because all will happen is that you would just simply shift reference point. Now, some people may call this reincarnation. The problem that I have with that word is not so much in and of itself, but it gives people a linear idea of what life, how life functions, because we're still looking at things in sequential 1 through 9, ideologies based on living on Earth, or 1 through 9 mathematics based on how we live on Earth. When you go to spirit, it's not limited from 1 through 9. Okay. When you're into spirit, if you get to that highest level, you don't have to walk. You can think yourself into any location you need to be at the time because you're
So that
not
would
limited to time and space.
bypass death then. That's all I wanted
Yes.
to say. Is that
Yes.
what you would be saying? Instead of reincarnation, we're looking at transformation or
Uh,
transcending into the energy is transferring into something different. That's deep.
Indeed, indeed. So that's it. There's always going to be you. You're a part of life. You're a part of consciousness. Even if black holes so to swallow the whole universe, life and consciousness is always going to find a way to exist.
That's all he can do, I guess. So,
Hmm.
is there anything else you wanted to say? I know I've had you. I thank you so much. It's an hour and 43. I don't know if you how long you got, but I don't want to hold you up too long. But if you
Hmm.
have anything else you want to add or that you think is important, or how we can find you, how they can find you,
Sure.
all that
Hmm.
good stuff. Is there
Hmm.
anything else you wanted to build on?
Well, sure. One way you can contact me or connect with me, I have a YouTube channel. I go by Kephra Ptah and also Ancient Wisdom Keeper. That wisdom is spelled Wizdom. So come check out Ancient Wisdom Keeper. There's other pages or other channels, that may have me doing interviews and so on. But Kephra Ptah, aka Ancient Wisdom Keeper.
You
That's
can
one way to
also shout
contact
out
me.
your Cash App if anybody, or put it in the comments. If anybody that sees now or watching later may want to donate to your ministry, you may want to tell them about what you do as far as students and things like that.
Okay. Well, in earlier when I introduced myself, you know, and my beloved sister introduced me as a Babalawo. I'm a priest of Ifa. I'm an Awo, you know. So and basically Babalawo just simply means king, or not king, but father of the mysteries. Okay.
Absolutely. Mhm.
So I basically deal with mysteries of the Yoruba tradition, but also not just the Yoruba, but also work with ancient Kemet, of course, Kephra Ptah. My Ifa name is Ifa Lowo, but my Kemetic name is Kephra Ptah. So I work with a form of energy work called Shechem. It's very similar to Reiki. In fact, Reiki is one of the modalities that I have people get attuned to before I teach them about this modality. And I also teach various forms of meditation and how to perceive different realities. And also, I divine for those who are interested in having a consultation where you want to find out who your orishas are or what type of destiny you may have. I do that as well. So I can be reached. My website right now is still under construction, but you can also email me at khepra.ptah@gmail.com, you know, and you can also check me out on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, so on.
Yeah, he's all over, all over. I've been knowing
I'm
him,
just
this
everywhere. I'm
brother
all
for
over the place.
years. For years, right?
Hmm.
Um, I just want to give thanks that, like I said, you brought me back out and everything. Like, come on, let's do this. So, I definitely want to hook up with you again on some other stuff. We had a request, like I know this was a while ago, but shout out to Steve Bobo because he'll probably be tapped in. So, I just want to say he was interested in like talks about Papa Legba and just us when
Hmm.
we talked about SU. A lot of people like that,
Hmm.
but we'll think of some other things. Whenever you can, we'll get on again and build on some other things too, so people can see your range, the range
Yeah,
that we
yeah.
build on.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
one subject that I like to talk about, I call it, Bob Eshu, and the concept of interdimensional travel. So
right.
maybe that's,
Yeah,
so we could talk about that, but that's a whole another topic for a
it is
whole another
because
day.
he has a mercurial nature, and they talk
Hmm.
about we gotta get on that. Let's make that a build. Yeah, we'll formulate how you want to talk about it when time permits. But I thank you for being here and yeah, sharing everything. Does anybody have any questions before we close out? If not, if you got some later, we'll come back to them and I'll make sure Brother Kephra, sees any messages that's left. And that's all I got.
I appreciate it. Well, again, I can be reached. If you want to have a consultation, just hit me up, khepra.ptah@gmail.com.
Peace. Okay, that's what's up right
Peace.
there. So to the new Soulja community, the people watching, supporting, and even the visitors that have stopped through, I want to thank everyone. And I'm still kind of on the fence about next Monday and what we're doing, but yeah, it's gonna be something interesting. I'll let you guys know because I'm kind of stuck between. Plus, Mercury's in retrograde, so I think like
Yeah.
next Monday, Mercury will be out of retrograde, or maybe like the last week or something. I'm not sure, but yeah, Monday will be out of retrograde. So we'll figure it out. But I think we did pretty good to say we're in this communication, challenges and stuff like that. Well, so they
Hmm.
say. It doesn't
Hmm.
always. I think it went. We've been flowing great. So.
Oh, yeah. When we get together, we flow.
We
So,
flow.
right,
Yeah,
right.
if I ever there's two places I wouldn't mind seeing New Mexico. The Roswell is very interesting, and also Seattle. So those are going to be on my bucket list for sure. You know,
Definitely. Come through. I'll
yeah,
make sure, who knows? Maybe in Seattle, I'll get a Sasquatch tour started.
yeah. Oh, that's great. That would be great. Hey, we got to think like that. With AI taking jobs and things are changing. I mean, our situation is different, but still, we
Mhm.
still got to look at different forms of income and how to make it.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. You
But
know,
anyway,
it,
so you guys, you'll have a blessed night. I just want to give thanks again for the Spirit bringing us all together and allowing us to share this space and to reflect on these mysteries. So thank you. And that's all I got, you guys. Y'all make sure y'all tap in next Monday. If you have not subscribed, hit like, subscribe, because the rabbit hole is only gonna get deeper, okay?
right.
Yeah. So y'all tap in. Okay. So peace, everybody. Ashe.
Shay, I sure.
I'm feeling good tonight. I'm in this loving energy. That's why I had to blow a kiss and just give a love spell to the whole audience. It is not.
I'm
It ain't
talking
on no
about.
negative stuff. It's just it's a love spell. May you love yourselves and spread the love. Yep. Okay,
Facts.
you guys.
Let it, let it expand.
Yeah.
Intergrammatic word for love is murder, meaning to cultivate. Yoruba
Okay, how
word
do you
for
say
love
it?
is ife. Ife meaning to spread and expand.
Ife. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How
Yeah.
do you say the other word?
The Kemetic word is murder. Murder
Murder.
meaning love. It
Murder.
also means to cultivate.
Okay. So yeah, we got to cultivate love.
That's right.
Okay,
That's right.
peace, you guys.
Peace.